Hello, this is Aaron Wissner with Local Future. I am here live on the line with Nicole Foss. It is about 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on Monday, June the 22nd, 2020. And for Nicole, I believe you are on Tuesday already, right? 11 in the
Tuesday,
morning?
11 o'clock in the morning, yes.
Well, how have you been doing? It's been a couple weeks since we've talked.
Well, things are okay. New Zealand has got the virus again, unfortunately, so that's bad news for us.
Yeah, I heard that you had a couple people that came in for a funeral or something, and they went to a hotel, and then nobody tested them. Why didn't they test them, Nicole? What's the deal?
They were supposed to. They're supposed to go into quarantine. Anyone who comes into New Zealand is supposed to go into quarantine for 14 days. They were allowed out of quarantine early.
But before they were tested.
To attend a funeral. They were tested when they got to Wellington. So they were told they had to drive in a totally enclosed way and not talk to anyone. And they were tested when they got from Wellington. So to Wellington. So they'd flown into Auckland, driven down to Wellington. Personally, I don't quite see how they did that without having to at least get gas or something like that.
But they did stop, was the latest report I heard.
They would have had to. There's no way they couldn't have stopped. So they got tested in Wellington. The tests came back positive. By then, they'd already been to the funeral. So yes, now there are more cases. There's another couple, I think, that came in from India even more recently. So yes, we have to deal with this again because everybody's
these were nationals that came home, basically, right?
From the UK.
They were abroad.
Yeah. They came from the UK. I have no idea where they were born, but they had recently come from the UK, and then other people had come in from India. So we do have some cases again. But because everybody's super, super vigilant, hopefully this won't turn into another outbreak and we won't have to go into lockdown again. But this is really an illustration of how challenging this is, because unless you can completely control your borders, even if you can get rid of it completely, you're not necessarily going to be able to stay rid of it. You have to be super, super vigilant. So they've actually put the military in charge of the process of screening people now. And they're going to be much tougher on testing when people come into the country. In fact, I think they're not even going to let people on the plane if they test positive. And New Zealand has a history of things like this in a sense. So a few times when I've been flying here, they've wanted to know about my visa status before they let me on the plane. So if I can't prove to them that I have a resident visa in New Zealand, I don't even get on the plane at the other end. So that's pretty much what they were trying to do with the COVID testing now, to make sure that anyone who's coming in this direction is negative before they get on the plane. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it is an island here, and that is such a huge advantage for us. So we can't just simply say, well, we did everything right and other people did things that were not right, although there is an element of that. I think New Zealand handled it extremely well. We were also one of the last countries to start getting it, so we had plenty of time to learn from the experience of others, and we're an island, which makes controlling the borders a whole lot easier. So we did have huge advantages, and I think we will get rid of it again. But it will be a question of vigilance. And I feel very sorry for people in places where really, no matter what vigilance you have, you can't control the borders. You know, if you live in a great big place that's divided into smaller polities, whether it's states or provinces or counties or whatever, and they all have different policies, and you can't control the travel between them, then you basically don't have a lockdown or control mechanisms, because anyone can go anywhere else from places where they don't have control mechanisms, and so there's really no means to control it. So the US at the moment is basically, seems to be taking the path that Sweden was originally taking, which is just let it burn through and cross your fingers and hope for herd immunity. But it doesn't seem that that's really necessarily going to work. So there was some new information.
I saw a report out of Sweden. It was something like they had figured out about 50% or something of the people had been infected, but herd immunity did not seem to be yet developing. But people were still going with the plan.
From what I've seen, it's more like 10% of the people in Sweden have already had it. So they're nowhere near herd immunity. They'd have to get to 70, 80% of the population having had it for that. They do have, well, they don't have mandatory control mechanisms. They do have voluntary ones, though. And one of the things that's interesting about Sweden is that people tend to trust their government and do what the government suggests that they do. So the government doesn't have to mandate things to the same extent in Sweden as it would in other places with lower trust. But I think it wouldn't surprise me at all if a lot of immigrants to Sweden, and there are a lot of them, were suffering disproportionately in this, because for one thing, they're less likely to trust the government because chances are they come from places where governments are not so trustworthy. But the main issue seems to be vitamin D. So if you live in an area really quite close to the poles, it's hard to make vitamin D. It's harder if your skin is darker, unfortunately. So I would suggest to anyone in Sweden or pretty much anywhere else where they might not be making enough vitamin D, for heaven's sake, please take vitamin D supplements.
Because yes, and for the U.S., if you're not getting Nicole's accent, that's vitamin D for the U.S. people.
Yeah, and I mean, you're moving into summer, so it'll be a bit less of an issue there. If people go outside, they'll get plenty of vitamin D that way. Mm-hmm. But if they don't have enough, because you're coming out of winter, people might have slightly low levels at the moment. I would really suggest taking it. And in places like Sweden or England, Ireland, anywhere that's near the poles one way or the other, you're not going to make vitamin D in the winter, because the sun is too low in the sky. And so you're going to be deficient, and that is going to leave you open to respiratory infections. So vitamin D seems to be probably the most important thing you can do to prevent getting this and to get it less badly if you do get it. So I would absolutely suggest it. It's not expensive. It's really easy to do. And I would suggest taking a reasonable quantity thereof. I mean, I take about 2 of the capsules, 2 or 3 capsules per day. So I would suggest that for other people. And there are other things you can do that seem to be preventive as well. So keeping your selenium levels up seems to be important. So 2 Brazil nuts a day will do that for you, or you can take supplements. I think so. There are ways to make this less likely to hit people hard. And I think that's going to be really important, especially in places where the sun isn't going to do it for you.
Well, and I think this is interesting because at least what I've read as far as vitamin D is concerned, that, pale Caucasian skin is an advantage in northern climates. And that's one of the reasons that people that live in northern climates like Europe have lighter skin, because if a person had dark skin, but they were covered up during the winter, that their body would not have the ability. I mean, even if their face was getting sun and their hands were getting sun, their skin wouldn't be making enough vitamin D. But for a Caucasian person in the winter, as long as their hands were out in the sun most of the day and their face was out in the sun and their head, whatever wasn't covered with clothing. Whereas on tropical,
equatorial
lines, this sort of skin is no good. Because it'd get
burnt. Oh, yeah. You would be burned to a crisp.
Yeah, horrible.
If you lived in say, Sudan or something like
right.
that.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of funny because sometimes I think, it would be so much easier for me to relocate to someplace like Belize or someplace much more tropical. But, my skin just is not the right color for that. I burn quite easily. And
so do I.
It makes so much more sense. I mean, it goes back to, adaptations and the reasons why Europeans are light-skinned and why non-Europeans have a darker skin. It has a lot to do with vitamin D, and it was this skin color that worked well. Although for the ones that lived in northern, like Canada, the Inuit, they had like a slightly darker complexion, didn't they? So I wonder where they got their vitamin D.
Well, it's a fat-soluble vitamin, and I think
Did they get it from
they would get some of it through diet.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert on things like this, but you're right. They are darker,
and
and
like
they're
that,
covered
fish?
up.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're covered up almost all the time. But I think they must get something at least through diet, because they don't seem to get chronically sick. In fact, they're extraordinarily healthy most of the time if they're living their traditional lifestyle. If they're importing Cheetos and Coke from down south and living on that, then not so much. But if they're living their traditional diet, eating their traditional diet, living their traditional life, then they're extremely healthy on the whole. So there must be something going on there. But I can't explain that, I'm afraid. That isn't something I know the answer to.
Well, I think that would also point out to why people who have darker skin, black or brown or whatever skin, who live in Michigan or other places that have winter, for example, even if they're outside in the winter, they're not necessarily going to have enough vitamin D.
Even you aren't going to get enough vitamin D in the winter.
I'd have to be outside a lot.
Or me. Well, the thing is, when the sun is below a certain angle and it's traveling low through the atmosphere, it doesn't create enough intensity when it hits your skin to create vitamin D in the winter. So
in Michigan, it's very cloudy anyway. There's a lot of snow.
Ottawa, when I lived in Ottawa, I seem to remember that between about October and about February, you weren't going to make any vitamin D no matter what you did, no matter what color your skin was, no matter whether you were outside naked all day or not, you were just not going to make any vitamin D.
It'd be too cold for me to do that, Nicole. Maybe, you know, you're a Canadian by nature.
But in the summer, you make a lot because you can go outside a lot. The sun is intense. And then you hope that that carries you through the winter. But that's one of the reasons that people get a lot more respiratory infections in the winter. They're inside a lot more and they have lower vitamin D levels. So the viruses are breeding.
You know, maybe for Caucasians, if you notice your skin is tanning.
Oh, yes, that makes a difference.
You would know that you're getting enough sunlight to make vitamin D. But if you're out a lot and your skin is not tanning, then not. Probably.
Yes. I think that's probably the best sort of rule of thumb, if you like. But I mean, even Caucasians should be taking vitamin D supplements because people don't go outside as much as they did in the past. Not that many people have outside jobs, for instance. So if you have an inside job, you should really think about taking some vitamin D, because I'm not convinced that we're going to get a vaccine for this anytime soon. It seems that not everybody produces antibodies, and the people who do, they don't necessarily last all that long.
And the virus could change too, because those antibodies might not be, they might not attach to a slightly mutated strain.
Yeah. And the other possibility, which is the case for some diseases like dengue fever, something called antibody-dependent enhancement, where the antibody attaches to the virus, and then the virus has a way of tricking the system to use the antibody to get into your T cells of your immune system, like HIV does. And it can shut down your immune system if it can do that. So there are ways that, and we don't know yet if this applies to COVID-19. There's so many question marks that we simply do not know. So my approach is apply the precautionary principle. If you don't know the answer, then sort of assume the worst, prepare for that while trying to find out more information as much as you possibly can, but at least you don't let it get out of hand to start with if you do that. Whereas if you don't apply the precautionary principle, if you just say, well, we don't really have full information, so we're not going to make a decision until we do, well, you've just made a decision, and the decision was to let it rip. So, and that's what the US is, parts of the US are doing, which basically means all of the US is doing it, because the parts that are trying to control this are going to be undone by the parts that aren't. So in the US, it's basically just going to let it rip. Sweden, it's going to let it rip, but under slightly more controlled conditions, because more people will be following the guidelines, and Sweden is not a huge country and its borders are closed. So it will be able to establish more control at some point if it decides it wants to. But and Brazil as well is another country that's just absolutely letting it rip. Jair Bolsonaro, the president of Brazil, basically said, oh, Brazilians are all tough. We're all athletes. We never get sick. So he just completely dismissed the virus as being
kind of contrasts with the mass grave imagery that we're seeing out of Brazil.
I know. Brazil is going to be worse than the US because they've made even fewer attempts to do anything about it. And then the countries like Ecuador and Mexico are currently having huge outbreaks. I mean, in places like Ecuador, I don't think they have a health system that's as developed as in some places. So in a lot of poor places, people are just, well, somebody died, let's just put them on the street outside the door and wait for someone to come and take them away.
So
And
it
that's
seems
what
like one of the implications here is that for people who live in wintry areas,
Mhm.
whether it's Russia or Europe or Canada or the US, the point at which people start spending time indoors again,
Mhm.
and so they're not getting as much vitamin D, and they're in closer contact with people, and the UV light isn't out there to destroy these
Mhm.
little particles that we're breathing out.
Mhm.
That's the point where, just like when the flu recurs every fall, that this virus is very likely to bloom again.
Oh,
A lot more.
absolutely. Pandemics usually come in waves. And I think that's partly because people have a limited tolerance for uh, sort of non-pharmaceutical methods like lockdown. So people can only cope with that for a certain amount of time. And it's partly psychological, partly that they go stir crazy if they're contained more often than that. And it's partly to do with physical reality, as in, I will starve to death if I don't go out and earn some money right now. That sort of thing as well. So people can maintain those control mechanisms for a certain amount of time, and then they're going to break down whether the disease is under control or not. And I think what we're going to see is, yes, another wave in the fall. And we haven't even really finished wave 1 in the US. I mean, Arizona, they have to keep changing the scale on the graph to accommodate Arizona because it's so much worse than everywhere else at the moment. Florida and Alabama and Georgia are all spiking, Oklahoma as well. So this is going to be a major, major problem. I mean, it is warm, and although this virus doesn't seem to be as seasonal, I mean, there isn't really evidence of seasonality at the moment, it wouldn't especially surprise me if there were seasonal aspects, simply because it's harder for droplets to transmit when it's really, really hot, and they evaporate very quickly. Then it becomes a question of how long does the virus stay on surfaces, and if it's outside in the UV, well, the answer is probably not very long. So you would expect some kind of change for summer. The virus seems to like between about
And it
5
seems like
degrees and
some of the
11
studies
degrees.
have said that it's only a small portion of infections that seem to be from surface contact, that it's mostly
Yes,
breathing in
yes.
someone else's droplets.
Yes, exactly. So another thing that I really would suggest that people do is to wear a mask. And masks are not to prevent you from breathing in viruses from someone else. They're to prevent you from coughing viruses out if you happen to be sick and don't know it. So because there are so many people who are either asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic, and they spread the virus before they know they have it. So the idea is, if you wear a mask, it prevents you from coughing out those droplets into the air around you. And so if everyone is doing it, because you don't know who's sick and who's not, if everyone's doing it, then this reduces transmission a lot. There have been quite a lot of studies looking at the difference between countries where people wear a mask and countries where people don't, and the difference is absolutely staggering. There's a lot of right-wing propaganda at the moment about, oh, well, it's all about reducing your freedom and it'll cut off your oxygen and you'll die of carbon dioxide poisoning. This is absolute crap, because if this were true, surgeons would have been dropping dead for years. I mean, surgeons wear masks for hours and hours and hours a day. These things are not airtight. This is ridiculous. So
Yeah.
people really should be thinking about wearing masks. And it's not that big a sacrifice to make, I think.
Well, yeah,
And they
and some
take
people
their
are
vitamin
like,
D.
one of my friends and some others were mentioning, it is not a big deal for someone to say, in order to come into my whatever shop, building, house, apartment, you need to have a mask on. I mean, in the US and Michigan where I lived, there always used to be a sign in the shopkeeper window that said, no shirt, no shoes,
No shoes, no service.
service.
Yes.
And I was talking with my wife, and she said, even if it just said no mask, no service, I wouldn't care about the shirt or the shoes. I think the mask is more important, she said, because in Michigan right now, depending on what city, what store, there are different rules at the moment. So if you're like in northern Michigan, nobody's wearing a mask. If you're in Holland, Michigan, on the beach, nobody's wearing a mask. If you're in certain, like if you're in the Whole Foods, or not Whole Foods, but the natural health store, everybody wears their mask. You know, if you go to Costco, everybody's wearing their mask, or you're kicked out, you know? So, but in some places it's like only a half of the people are wearing the mask. And then it's becoming this kind of politicized thing where
it is.
The ones who are, you know, freedom, go Donald, are refusing to wear a mask. And then the ones who are like, I don't want to get sick for myself or my family or whoever, and, you know, freedom, yes, but also, you know, I believe science, are wearing masks.
And it's such a small thing. I mean, there have been some really interesting, just heart-rending threads on Twitter of things, people posting, you know, things that their ancestors lived through, things they had to go through in like World War II, and or all the various horrible things that have happened in different parts of the world. And sort of, my grandmother did this, and this, I will wear a mask, and things like that. And they're absolutely heartbreaking to think what sacrifices people have had to make in the past, the kind of things people have had to do just to survive. And when we're asked to sort of stay at home, Netflix and chill, and then wear a mask if you go out, is that such a big sacrifice?
But by the same token, in the US at least, there have been a lot of assemblies here, and you can call them protests or demonstrations or rallies or whatever. And for example, the president, Donald, had this thing in Tulsa, Oklahoma at this COK stadium or something, and it had a capacity of 19,000 or something. He had 7,000 or 8,000 there, but the majority of them, from the pictures, well, they might argue with you, so I'm just going to go with 7,000, be generous. So, but the majority of the people there from the pictures were not wearing masks. I mean, there were a few, like 1 out of 20, maybe. Yeah, it was not a lot, and they were like, you know, sitting like in a basketball stadium, you know, a hockey stadium sort of stadium. And they were close to each other, especially because behind the president, it looked like they filled in all those bleachers first behind him. They
fill those with the actors. He puts ads on Craigslist. Every time he has a rally, he puts ads on Craigslist for minority actors to come and hold signs and smile.
There was a family there that was like all together, and they had their shirts on, African-American family. I didn't ever think about the fact they might be actors. But my major point is that whether it's a political rally like this, or whether it's, you know, being in the streets of New York City or London or whatever, not a whole lot of people wearing masks there either. I mean,
they are different. I mean, indoor and outdoor seems to make an enormous difference. I mean, personally, if I was at a protest, I would be wearing a mask anyway, outdoors or not, because people do get close. Even if you don't intend to get close to people, stuff happens, and you're going to get closer to people than you would ideally want. If you're thinking in terms of social distancing, don't assume you can maintain it. So I'd wear a mask anyway. But outdoors seems to be less of an issue, just because there's, as long as the air is moving around a bit, it just doesn't seem to accumulate. So it's the amount of virus in the air and the amount of time that you're exposed to it. But if you're moving around a lot and you're outdoors and everybody else is moving around and it's not building up in concentration, then it seems to be less of an issue. I think the rally is a lot more of an issue. It's a very big space, but still, it's an indoor space, and there weren't that many people wearing masks.
I imagine it's kind of like an odor, right? I mean, if you're sitting next to these people in the stadium, if you can smell an odor from them, whatever odor it happens to be, then you're probably also breathing in whatever they're breathing out. Whereas if you're outdoors and you're not smelling odors from anyone, then the likelihood is less that you're actually breathing in their vapors.
True. I do think that we are going to see more cases from both the rally and the protests. The protests, it takes about 3 weeks. So you would perhaps be starting to see cases turn up to the hospital from the protests in a week or so. The additional people turning up now are more from the Memorial Day weekend, when everything was starting to open up and there was like huge numbers of people at Lake of the Ozarks and things like that.
You know,
But
it looks like at the protests, though, that a lot of the people were very, I mean, it didn't look like there were a lot of people who were like really obese or overweight. You know, it looked like it was a lot
They were
of
mostly
healthy
young.
people, a lot of young
Yeah.
people. So the incident, so the likelihood of a pre-existing condition is probably smaller.
Yeah.
And you know, if everybody's asked to come sit down and relax and listen to somebody talk for an hour or two.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the protesters are typically young. Trump supporters are much older. So that's going to make a difference as well. And a lot of the people who are Trump supporters often seem to have comorbidities as well. So when you see pictures of them waiting outside, a lot of them don't look terribly healthy. So yeah, I think there are going to be cases there. There are already several cases. There are several cases among the Secret Service and his own staff already. Several cases that are positive. Not as many as 10, I think, but it's approximately that. And so it wouldn't surprise me at all if in 2 or 3 weeks from now, we start to see cases coming from this rally as well. And the next rally apparently is in Arizona, which has even more cases. So this will be interesting.
I don't know if he's actually doing a rally there, but he is going to Arizona tomorrow. And I was going to talk with Robert Rapier tomorrow.
Ah, good.
But it's not, I don't know that it's actually a rally. I'm sure he'll be somewhere and he'll talk, but it's not like in a stadium or anything like that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just saw someone mention that he was going to Arizona next, so I haven't looked at the details. But it will be interesting to see what happens from this and see who ends up getting blamed for it. You know, I'm really concerned that the virus is going to take off again, and places like Arizona and Texas and Georgia and Florida, they're going to end up being overwhelmed, and hospitals overwhelmed, same as New York City was not so long ago. But people just seem to have to learn the hard way, and that's such a terrible, terrible shame. But it just doesn't seem that people can summon up the ability to en masse, collectively decide to tackle this. So everybody's doing their own thing. And that seems to be when you really have a problem with the pandemic. When, and in history as well, when people don't get their act together in a pandemic, you tend to have much worse problems that flow as a result from that. Whereas when people sort of come together and say, this is what we've got to do, and they do it, and people follow those instructions, not because someone's telling them to do it, but because they internalize those rules themselves, and they simply decide for themselves this is the right thing to do altogether, then the impact of the pandemic is a lot less. So this pandemic is going to have very different impacts in different places, because people in different places are handling it extremely differently. You know, I'm really concerned, particularly about the States at the moment, because of all the division and the polarization.
It always amazes me. I was on the line with David Kurovich this morning, and he knows so much about the U.S. and you know so much about the U.S. You two don't even live in the U.S. Why does everyone outside the U.S. Why do you guys know so much about the U.S.? I mean, I know hardly anything about Ireland or New Zealand or Canada or the U.K. You guys are like picking out states and talking. Well, Trump's going. I mean, how I wouldn't have even known that he was going to Arizona, other than that it was a very specific thing. But you guys seem to know all this stuff. It drives me crazy. How is it that you guys know all this stuff?
I spend every waking moment reading and researching. Basically, I mean, this is my life, and I think it's David's life too. So it's just what we do. And yeah, I've heard various people come up with arguments. People live in the U.S. saying, well, what about this? What about that? And I think, where would I even start? Like, not you, but because you understand all this, but there are various people who I've been trying to have conversations with on various kinds of social media. And I literally think, where would I even start? Like, I mean, 3 years worth of every waking moment when I'm not sleeping or eating, researching all of this. And learning all the key players and trying to figure out this is just what I do. And David's mind works the same way as mine. We're sponges and we suck up information. So we seek out information and we suck it up and we process it, and we have these frameworks in our heads of little boxes and things where everything fits together.
Okay, so speaking of all this, and I know I cut you off with a previous line of thought, and you can go back to that one if you remember what it is, but I wanted to get your perspective on the big news, John Bolton and his book of secrets. Because some people are saying, oh, he's a liar and he's a war hawk. Well, the war hawk, I believe, but the liar, I don't know. And the thing that's really, frustrating is there was this whole impeachment thing in the House of Representatives in the US, and he didn't testify. Well, and then apparently he said, well, I would have testified, but it wouldn't have made a difference, and I would have waited until it got to the Senate, but nothing happened in the Senate. It wasn't picked up by the Senate. So what's your perspective on this John Bolton and his book of secrets?
I completely despise John Bolton on a personal level. He is a warmonger. He has been trying to go to war with just about everybody for his entire career. And I really have basically no respect for John Bolton whatsoever.
So this should make our right-wing viewers really agree with you. They should be nodding their head.
I do not think he's a liar. I think he is absolutely telling the truth. He takes meticulous notes. So as much as I think he's a horrible, horrible human being, I think he's way more of a patriot than Trump. I think he actually does care about the country a lot, in a completely inappropriate way, I would say. But I think he absolutely is a patriot, and he's not a liar.
I'm wondering about his upbringing. I'm wondering about his upbringing. I mean, was he also sent to military school, I wonder, at a young age? Didn't you say Trump was sent to military school or something?
But he's somewhere to the right of Genghis Khan, and he just totally gets off on violence, which are not admirable traits as far as I'm concerned.
But you don't think he lies about this?
I don't think he lies. I think he didn't want to testify in the House because he hates the Democrats and he doesn't want to do anything to help them, even if it was his patriotic duty to do so. So he would have testified in the Senate because they're Republicans, but they didn't call for testimony, so he never testified. He has completely screwed himself by doing this because now he's violated an NDA. So the book, they're not preventing publication of the book. They can't. It's out everywhere now.
Have you read it yet?
They're suing him because he signed an NDA. They're suing him for all the proceeds from the book. So the best they can do is punish him, take all the money he might have made from this, and maybe give him a criminal record or something as well. That's the most they can do. So they're trying to hurt him as much as they can, but they can't prevent the information getting out there. And basically the information just confirmed everything in the impeachment inquiry and more so. So Bolton came out and said that Trump engaged in obstruction of justice as a way of life, which is really clear. If you pay attention to all this stuff, it's absolutely 100% clear that this is what he's been doing. You didn't have to be an insider to know that. But that's what John Bolton has really been coming out and saying, that every single part of the foreign policy in the US is transactional. It's all based on what is good for Trump personally, and he will use the power of the state to grant favors or to withhold things that have been voted for by Congress in order to get what he wants. So this is mob boss behavior.
Do you believe this stuff
bribery
in there?
And extortion.
Do you believe this stuff in there? There was a one chapter excerpt, I think, that I read 2 or 3 days ago, and it was talking about he was meeting with China's leader, whoever that happens to be.
Xi Jinping.
And he said, Donald said to him, hey, I'd really like you to buy some more grain and soy or something from our Midwest because I need those people to vote for me. And
absolutely.
And then when talking about the people from Ungar province or something like that are being
the Uyghurs.
Say it again.
The Uyghur Muslims, they're Turkic people. They live in the east of China, so they're not Han Chinese.
In the east,
They're,
like over near, over
in
near
the
North
center.
Korea?
So yeah, so not the coastal area, all the west of, or, sorry, the west. All
Okay.
the east of China, the coast of China is Han Chinese. The Uyghurs live in the west. Sorry, got that wrong. The Uyghurs live in the west of China. They're Turkic peoples and they're Muslim. And they're basically being rounded up and stuffed into concentration camps because
What's on the
China.
border there? Is that Afghanistan on the border?
Yeah, Soviet Central Asia, former Soviet Central Asia, places like that, and then India and things. So moving right into the center of the Asian continent.
But Trump
basically,
apparently said that,
he
it's okay to
greenlighted
imprison
concentration camps for Muslims if Xi Jinping would give him dirt on Joe Biden and buy a bunch of farm products in order to get the farmers to think that Trump was on their
So
side.
do you believe all this stuff? I mean, does it have merit coming out of Bolton's mouth?
Absolutely. All of that has merit. That's exactly the sort of things that I would expect him to be doing. And if you read Seth Abramson's work as well, I mean, it confirms all of it. And they're completely independent. They
What
would
was
have
the
had
name
nothing
of Seth's book again? I know you've mentioned it.
Seth Abramson has written a trilogy on this. The first one was Proof of Collusion. So that was looking at the Mueller report type stuff. So what was going on with Russia. And then the next one is proof of conspiracy. So then he was looking at the grand bargain. So it wasn't just Russia, it was Russia, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Israel, China, and Turkey are all interfering in elections on Trump's behalf. They're all dictators that Trump is fond of. So he's working with them and doing these transactional deals, quid pro quo type deals with all these parties, sort of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours type of deals with all the dictators in these various places. The third book is coming out in September, and that's called Proof of Corruption. And so that's taking it even further, looking at things like how the withdrawal from Syria, for instance, was so that Trump could renew the licenses on his Istanbul buildings. So, and also he promised Erdogan of Turkey that he would make an investigation into their Halkbank go away. I think so. Halkbank was involved in various kinds of corruption as well, and he actually told he told Erdogan that he would make the people at SDNY, Southern District of New York, which is part of the DOJ, the Department of Justice. He said he'd put all his own people in there and make the case go away, which is exactly what he already did in Washington, the Eastern District in Washington. He just replaced the prosecutors and made the cases go away. This is what he's doing. It's one of the ways he's abusing the rule of law.
Was this what happened a couple days ago where there was...
That's part of it. He was trying to shut down investigations. So Bill Barr was trying to fire Jeffrey Berman.
Bill Barr a good guy or a bad guy?
Oh, he's awful. He's the worst attorney general in the history of the US. He's basically Trump's personal defense lawyer. He's Mr. Cover-Up. And this is not the first time. He did the same thing in the Iran-Contra scandal when he was AG the first time under the Bush administration. So he covered up all the Iran-Contra stuff and made all of that go away so that people didn't have to do time. So when he wanted to be AG again, he wrote an audition letter to Trump, basically saying that he believed in total executive power and basically saying, I'm your cover-up guy. Choose me. I'll make all your problems go away. He's a fixer. He's taken over from Michael Cohen. So that's exactly what he's been doing. He tried to fire Jeffrey Berman, who was the head of SDNY, but he didn't have the legal authority to do that. So Berman said no. So Barr got Trump to fire him, which Trump does have the authority to do. But
I thought Trump denied that.
Yes, he did, but he lies all the time. You can't believe a single thing that Trump says. He says these things because he doesn't want to be seen to be taking responsibility for things. He wants to let everyone else make the decisions, and if they're good decisions and things go well, he will take the credit. If they're bad decisions and things go badly, he will dump on other people. So this is just his modus operandi all the time. He lets other people be the ones to be in front and sort of the leader following from behind, so to speak. But this is absolutely what he's doing. So he didn't manage to Berman is leaving, but he didn't manage to put his own handpicked choice in there who would have just been a lackey who would have killed all the cases.
Because the deputy was elevated to the position,
Yes.
right?
Yes, and the deputy is not going to let these cases drop. And at the moment, it doesn't seem like there's any legal way to prevent deputy from taking over. That doesn't mean that he won't try something illegal, because Lord knows he does that all the time, but we'll have to wait and see. There are a lot of cases pending at SDNY. There's the Fruman and Parnas case. They're investigating Rudy Giuliani. They're investigating various oligarchs. Dmitry Firtash, for instance, is fighting extradition from Ukraine. There are several really important cases at SDNY at the moment. And Barr has been trying to shut them down, but it hasn't worked.
So Bolton said something about, oh gee, I kind of forgot what he said now. He said that initially, and I'm paraphrasing here, this was like from the first chapter of his book. He said, initially, Donald didn't make any decisions because he had a lot of adults around him that came in with him as part of his administration. But then he fired them all, one after the other, a little at a time, and he brought in yes men, and now he's making all the decisions, but not really. He's just going with what the yes men are saying, but they're all just trying to please him, basically.
Yeah, Jared Kushner has a lot of power at the moment, which is awful, because if anything, Jared Kushner is a worse human being than Donald Trump.
What's his background? I mean, he's not part of the, I mean, he is not Trump's son, right? His son-in-law. So where's he come from?
He's a billionaire. He's a billionaire. His father was jailed by Chris Christie. It's quite an interesting story. His father is a nasty
New Jersey.
Yes, he was AG at the time in New York, in New Jersey, and so Charles Kushner.
Is Chris Christie a good guy?
I wouldn't say he was entirely good or bad.
Okay.
He's done a lot of things I dislike, and I think
when
I would
say
disagree.
Good, I mean selfish versus, you know, not.
He's not entirely selfish. He's done some things that I think were pretty underhand. The whole sort of Bridgegate thing, this is corruption, it's petty corruption. So he's done a bunch of that. He still likes Trump, which is a huge black mark against his name in my book. But at the same time, I have on occasion heard Chris Christie be really brutally honest with his electorate. So when he was first elected as governor of New Jersey, he was saying, and this was a few years ago, I remember seeing an interview with him where he was saying, well, you know, I looked at the books and there was absolutely nothing I could do. There's all these third rail issues, and I'm just going to reach in there. I'm going to grab that third rail because that's all I can do. And he was talking about how he was doing things that were political poison, but how there was absolutely no choice. And he was being completely above board and open with people about what he was doing and why. And I think the fact that he was honest about that, about the need for dealing with the budget problems, actually helped him a lot politically. Even although he was doing things that are normally the kind of thing that people hate you for, if you're honest with people and you say, look, we're all in the same boat. These are the books. These are the choices. This is the choice I made, and this is why. Then I think people are more likely to accept it. This is something Trump never does. Trump will lie about everything. Christie can be honest.
This reminds me of a lot of politicians in that they can be blatantly honest about stuff, but that doesn't make them really creative or innovative. I mean, or visionary. I mean,
yeah, not at all.
You can imagine,
I wouldn't say Christie was visionary or anything.
You can imagine, you know, putting Nicole Foss in one of these governor positions, and she'd be like, you know, I got some people I know, and I'm going to call them in, and we're going to look at this plan, and we're going to maybe start a state bank. We're going to do a few things. And we're going to take care of this right now, because, you know, Nicole Foss has some ideas. Whereas these people, you know, they can tell the honest truth, but they're like, this is, you know, as far as I can tell, this is all we got, you know? And
yeah, exactly.
Everybody else is like, yep, okay.
He's not an ideas man. And I have a huge problem with the fact that he stays associated with Trump. But Christie actually jailed Kushner's father, Charles Kushner, because Kushner's father really didn't like his brother-in-law. There was something his brother-in-law had been doing that Kushner's father did not like. So he hired a prostitute.
Brother-in-law or Kushner's brother-in-law?
So Charles Kushner hated his own brother-in-law, his sister's husband.
Okay.
So he hired a prostitute to seduce his brother-in-law, videoed it, and sent it to his sister. So it is an entrapment kind of, he went to jail for this. So, and he's done a lot of really dodgy things.
That's really rude.
There's a book by Vicky Ward called Kushner, Inc. that I think people should really read if they want to know more about Jared Kushner. But the dodgy dealings, the criminality that he's been involved in is just staggering. He's quite young. So
Kushner, Inc., greed, ambition, corruption.
Yes.
The extraordinary story of Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump.
Yep.
Okay, that's 2019.
Yep. So, I mean, there's so much corruption. What autocrats do, they typically rely on family because family are less likely to spill their guts to the authorities. So they can count on family to be more loyal. This is the way the mob works. So you have a lot of family, but you also then have associates, and you make sure you have compromat on every one of them. So you make sure that you can prove that they've done something heinous that they would go to jail for if you tell, and everyone has compromat on everyone else. This is what keeps the loyalty together. So this is how systems like that work. Everybody is doing bad things, and everybody knows what everybody else is up to, and no one will spill the beans because they know they're doing just as bad things as everybody else. So that it's sort of a sort of conspiracy of silence, if you like, when they're all sitting there doing all these awful things and nobody tells anybody.
This reminds me of like the most nasty stories about fraternities and things like that, where you know, you have to go through this initiation,
hazing.
And you have to, well, not just the hazing, but the initiation itself, like you have to do things that are unethical as part of the initiation in order to get into the club. And because you've done that unethical thing and everybody saw you do this, now you're like, everybody could spill the beans on you and say, you know, he did such and such and he did such and such.
Yep, that's exactly it.
Or there was this group, I don't know if you've heard of this group in the US, where it was this men's group, and these men would get together in the US and they'd all get naked over a weekend in like a hut, and they do this male initiation, man initiation thing, and everybody had to be naked, like fully naked, and you couldn't leave your briefs on or anything, and then you had to share your innermost secret or something, and then, you know, you came out of the weekend and you were feeling better because you shared your innermost secret or something. But then you're kind of like, you spilled your beans to a bunch of strangers, basically.
Yep.
So, and I don't know if you've heard of this thing, but I
haven't, but it's very familiar, because this is what groups do to sort of glue themselves together so that nobody will go off and tell stories about them. Everyone has compromat on everyone else. This is how Russia works all the time. This is what Jeffrey Epstein was up to. His private island was a compromat factory. It was, let's invite all these people in, and we'll get them in these compromising positions. We'll videotape all of it, and then we can control them. And that's exactly what he was up to.
Yeah,
was working with various intelligence agencies.
Let's come back to that later and come back to Jared Kushner for a minute.
Sure.
So tell me more about Jared.
Well, I mean, for instance, the whole blockade of Qatar was about Kushner strong-arming Qatar to bail him out of a disastrous real estate development. Was it 666 Fifth Avenue, if memory serves? That I might be wrong, the number's right, but I'm not sure if the road name is right.
That's The Devil Wears Prada, or the one with Brad Pitt as the devil or something? I can't. No. Al Pacino. Al Pacino is the devil. What one was that?
Qatar bailed him out to the tune of $1 billion over this disastrous real estate investment. So the kind of things that these people are involved in has nothing to do with the interests of the country. They are just doing everything for their own benefit. And it's not just Trump, it's his entire entourage. They're all corrupt. They're all absolutely in it up to their eyeballs. The things that these people are doing. And people don't believe it. It's so complicated that you try and explain all the complexity. I mean, Chuck Aberson, thousands of pages of meticulously footnoted references to explain all of this. And it's not something you can do on Twitter or Facebook posts or something like that. It's so complicated that if you'd written it as fiction, no one would believe it. They would say this is just completely unbelievable. But truth is stranger than fiction. And when you can demonstrate the entire theory of the case, as Seth Abramson has done in his books, I mean, it's really quite clear that this is a criminal administration, and it's extremely dangerous. And the things that could happen when you have a malignant narcissist and he finally realizes he's about to lose for real, and that his facade is about to be stripped away, it wouldn't surprise me if he actually decided to nuke somebody. Because this kind of narcissism is what school shooters have as well. They think they're special, and they think, well, if I'm going to go out, I'm going to take a bunch of people with me. They're so angry that they want to take people with them. And Trump is that sort of person. Only imagine what you could do if it's not a school shooting, but you've got serious weaponry to play with. This is the kind of thing that really worries me, because even if he loses, I don't think he's going to leave peacefully. I mean, he's already said as much. He's already saying that the election's rigged, that you can't believe anything. Oh, all the mail-in votes, everything will be fraudulent. And he's just setting this up now, setting the stage to say that the entire election was bogus and that he's going to stay. But even if for some reason they do manage to get rid of him, he's still got 2 months between November and January when he can cause absolute havoc. And there really isn't anything that anybody can do about it. And yeah, I'm really concerned, because malignant narcissists have no conscience, no empathy. They literally have no boundaries no filters against doing anything, no matter how awful. So I really worry how much more he's going to do from here on. I don't think we've seen the worst of it at all in terms of what he's capable of.
So tell me about Ivanka.
Propaganda Barbie. I mean, she definitely reminds me of the Barbie doll.
Apparently Bolton has said some things about, Ivanka is not a great person either. Like,
definitely not. If you read Noel Casler's Twitter feed, that's a good place to start. He was Ivanka's handler for several years on Celebrity Apprentice, so he knows her really, really well. And he says he's far more concerned about her and Jared than he is about Trump. As much as he despises Trump, he said Trump just wants praise and money. Jared and Ivanka want to rule the world. He's far more concerned about what they would do with power than what Trump will do with power, or than what Trump is doing with power. He's also very concerned about Don Jr., because he says Don Jr. makes his father look like a nice guy. So, and Don Jr.'s nickname in
Saturday Night Live teases as being not intelligent, or is that the other?
All of them. They tease all of them for being not intelligent.
Okay.
And apparently that's true, apparently. But I mean, Don Jr.'s nickname at college was Date Rape Don. And he and Ivanka were both falling down drunks when they were in college. And things. So they are huge problems. Noel Casler points out that
What
Ivanka
is your source for falling down drunk, Don?
Noel Casler talks about things like that all the time.
Okay. And who is he again?
So, Noel Casler, he was the talent handler at Celebrity Apprentice.
Okay.
So he worked with Trump for years, and specifically worked with Ivanka for 3 years, I believe, the last 3 years of the show. But I mean, the things that he points out, and that she's completely changed her voice to do this sort of soft sort of thing to try and, that's how she winds Trump around her little finger. She does this soft sort of voice, but apparently in private, she swears like a trooper, and her voice is a full register lower and things, and completely different. There's a facade. Each of these people has a facade, but that's not what they are underneath. And apparently every single one of them is awful. Just absolutely awful.
I'm concerned that all the Trump supporters who are watching the show are like throwing rocks at their screen or throwing their phone into the wall or something. So,
well, it's no secret to anyone who follows my work what I feel about.
We need to find someone for them to be able to support, like a real person who is really conservative or whatever, but is honest at the same time.
I do think
like
the U.S.
McCain
needs
or
a
something.
conservative party.
Wasn't McCain like a good guy? He seemed like a good guy to me.
I haven't gone into detail. I've seen people say lots of good and bad things about McCain. People saying, oh, he's done all this and we hate him and he's a war criminal. I have not done the investigation into John McCain, so I can't give you an informed opinion on that. I would say he was a hell of a lot better than most of the current Republicans in Congress, but I don't know enough about his history to make an overall assessment. But I think,
or even Bob Dole,
well if
you remember Bob Dole, you know, he had the
vaguely, yeah, I do remember Bob Dole. Wasn't a fan of Dole either. I can't remember specifically what he had been into that I particularly disapproved of, but I do remember reading about it years ago. So I'd made my judgment, but I can't remember the basis on which I had made that judgment anymore.
Do you see anything that, like, for someone who's, you know, I guess I don't even know how to describe conservatism nowadays, but for someone who votes Republican, I mean, is there like a really good person they could get behind and be like, yeah, you know, I'd like this guy to be my president?
Amash would be good.
Yeah.
I mean, not for this time, but for another time, perhaps. He's quite young. I rather liked Jeff Flake a few years ago. So, yeah, Flake can be flaky, which is a problem. But he did some interviews on Charlie Rose a few years ago and wrote a book called The Conscience of a Conservative. And I actually really do think he has a conscience and that he would do his absolute best to do the right thing. I remember sitting in the room, I was in Canada at the time, watching this interview with Charlie Rose. And
this can't be his real name, because his name is Jeff Flake and he lives in Snowflake, Arizona.
Yes.
That can't be right.
It is right, because he and someone else whose last name was Snow founded the community.
Oh, sure. Okay, I get it.
And he thought that Snowflake sounded better than Flake Snow.
That couldn't have been his imported name, though. I mean, you didn't come from Europe with the name Flake as your last name.
I wouldn't have the faintest idea. But I mean, he's a Mormon. He and his wife are really, really powerfully Mormon, and really, really religious. They went and did a lot of service overseas, voluntary service overseas, and things. So he's the sort of person who has really put his money where his mouth was, if you like, in his previous past. I think the problem with he tried to stand up to Trump. If I had to guess, I would say he was probably threatened. So he backed off after he initially came out as really anti-Trump. After a while he just backed off and he just quit. I think he was probably threatened, and his whole family as well. That's very much the impression I get, because everyone who opposes Trump is threatened.
Could he have been, entrapped like some of these other people have been entrapped, and they got video on him doing something?
I have no idea what he might have done. I mean, being a religious fundamentalist suggests he probably wouldn't have been entrappable in the way that some people would have been, but who knows what he might have done in his past. I think I think threats sound more plausible in his case than blackmail, but you never know. Oh, Daryl is calling in. He finally got some IT support. He's trying to call, and I'm trying to see what he's trying to call on. A messenger, apparently.
Okay, I'm going to pause. So you got a call real quick there, and that was one of your friends who hopefully is going to come on a future show. Can you just give us like 2 sentences about him, and then we'll go back to our conversation?
Yep. So Daryl Taylor is an Australian permaculturalist, among other things. He's phenomenally intelligent. And one of the things that he's most interested in is community and how to spread ideas about building community. So he talks about natural nurturers and natural networkers who tend to be women of a certain age who run community organizations. And he would point out that if you can get your idea to somebody like that, they will send these ideas virally, completely under the radar. So people don't tend to notice these people from above, because they're very much embedded in the community at a local level. But they have the capacity to spread ideas like almost nobody else, because they're at that level and fully embedded. So all these community ideas and how to create a better future are the kind of things that Daryl is really interested in.
Great.
He's a psych nurse by background.
Okay, and go back to Jeff Flake, I think is where we were at.
Yes. So I do think Jeff Flake is a reasonably admirable person. I have definitely had disputes with him over some of the things he's done, particularly around the confirmation of Kavanaugh, where he would not stand up for a real investigation. But the expressions on his face, he seemed to be absolutely tortured when people were talking to him about this. So this is what makes me think he's been threatened, because he really looked like he desperately wanted to agree with these people, but he just couldn't. So he looked like he was sort of trying not to burst into tears, being put in this position and things. So I don't know for sure. I'm speculating, but I do think he's an interesting character. And there are quite a lot of interesting never-Trumpers as well. I mean, even people like Joe Walsh. I mean, Joe Walsh is a Tea Party Republican. He's been known to have a mouth and things, and to say some pretty unsavory things in the past as well. The thing
Nicole, why are these all men? Why are they all white men? Can't you pick up a woman at least, or a person of color, one or the other, for conservative?
In the Republican Party?
Well,
a person of color? Well, there's Ben Carson, who never seems to wake up.
I don't know what to think of Ben sometimes. Apparently, he did help Trump understand Juneteenth, apparently.
Yes.
Although that was supposedly a Secret Service agent who was a black Secret Service agent who let Trump know that, yeah, this is a real thing.
Well, I'm quite sure that the people who originally set the date knew perfectly well that it was Juneteenth, because it wouldn't have been Trump that set it. It would have been Stephen Miller, and his thing is to provoke race war. So, yeah, that's exactly the sort of thing that he would do. But there basically aren't any people of color in the Republican Congress. Or I think there may be one whose name I don't even know, but they're certainly not prominent people. And when I think of women in the Republican Party, they seem to be pretty awful. I mean, people like Elise Stepanik, and it's like, ew. I think these people have a conscience and are worthy of respect at all. There are very, very few who are actually in Congress at the moment who I would respect. I absolutely respect Justin Amash, because he stood up for what he believed in. He left his own tribe, which takes a lot of courage.
Even if he's
nobody else has done that.
Even if he's 100% pro-life.
Yeah, because I don't expect people to agree with me on everything. If somebody is reasonable and rational, a normal human being, and I can have a discussion with them.
He's also an Austrian, though.
Oh yes, I know.
So he would say, just give all the, although I don't think he's actually an Austrian, though, because he says, you know, we need to get money to the people. And that's not what an Austrian would say. An Austrian would say, give the money to the businesses, and then they will hire the people. But he's not saying that. So I don't know.
No, I would disagree with him on a lot politically, but I respect him as a person. And I don't really mind if someone's political positions are different from mine, as long as they're prepared to discuss them rationally, and that maybe we can come to some kind of compromise. Because I'm not suggesting that the world should be run the way that I would do it if it was me. I mean, there is no one right solution anyway. I mean, it depends on the circumstances. Sometimes you need more control, sometimes you need less. And so the pendulum swings all the time. And I have no problem with people who I disagree with, as long as they're prepared to have a sane, sensible, rational discussion about policy positions, and then we can come to some kind of compromise. This sort of bipartisan approach that people used to be able to engage in, I think, is definitely something that people need to do a lot more of, to get away from this tribalism, this partisan tribalism, where if one party says something, then the other party must be against it, even if it's a good idea. That sort of thing is just ridiculous. It's like cutting off your nose to spite your face. You know, if somebody has a good idea, support it. It doesn't matter if it came from the other side.
Hey, can I show you something?
Sure.
And the viewers in Australia and the UK and Canada might be, why do you always talk about Amash? Well, he's just an example. Well, he's not just an example. I mean, he's probably going to be in the political landscape. He could be a president in 4 or 8 or 12 years from now. So who knows? But, you know, he's in my, he's the person I would be voting for. I'm in his district anyway. So, but since he's not running on the Republican Party platform, they've lifted somebody else up. So this is the guy they're lifting up. Conservative veteran Peter Meijer for Congress. Never before elected to anything, but his name is Meijer, and you know Meijer is a huge corporation centered in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Grocery stores, isn't it?
And yes, in the grocery store. I don't think he works for the grocery stores, but let me just read.
It's the name recognition.
Yes. So he will defend our liberty. It's House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy loves him. House Republican whip Steve Scalise, Congressman Don Crenshaw, Senator Tom Cotton
all of those are awful.
Defending our
every
country.
One of them.
Peter Meijer served our country in the U.S. Army Reserves, where he fought terrorists in Iraq to keep Americans safe. Now he's on a mission to defend our liberty when our economy and our rights are under attack. So we got this in the mail, of course.
Oh, that's awful. Every single one of those Republicans who you listed off there, not one of them is worthy of respect whatsoever. They're all awful.
Well, yeah. So now in our district, there's going to be a Democratic candidate. I don't know who it is. There's going to be Amash, who's running independent. And then there's going to be this Meijer guy who's running on the Republican Party. And it's going to come down to who has the most money, really, because what are the chances Amash as an independent, people are actually going to, because you can almost kind of you can't pull party line, but you can bubble in all the Democrats or all the Republicans. It's pretty easy. And so they're going to have
quite a lot of Democrats sent Amash money.
Oh, I hope so.
Until he ran for president. As soon as he said he was going to run for president, all of that would have dried up. And then people just went back to hating him because he was a right-winger. I think it was actually a major mistake to say that he was running for president, because until then he had bipartisan support and he would probably have won his seat. Now I'm not so sure.
Well, if he had talked to me, I would have sent him a paper and I would have said, look, there was a guy 4 years ago who was thinking about running for president, and he did this big study. I don't know if it was, what's that guy out of New York who kind of ran for a few weeks and then he disappeared?
Bloomberg?
Bloomberg, yeah. So Bloomberg or somebody had made this huge study, about, you know, how late can you jump in and still have a chance? Ballot access and everything. And basically it was, you can't jump in less than a year. I mean, there's just no way to do it. And, you know, Amash jumped in like 6 months before, or 8 months before. It was too late. So, but let's stop talking about Amash, because I really want to hear about Epstein and the his madame or whatever, the woman who found the people, and something about the UK and a prince or something. What is that going on? Tell me about that thing, because I don't get it.
So Ghislaine Maxwell is the daughter of Robert Maxwell, who was a publishing mogul in the UK and a Mossad agent. He was killed.
Mossad agent? What's that?
Israeli Secret Service. The Mossad is the Israeli Secret Service.
Israel Secret Service. So he's Jewish, and
I assume so.
So he was in Israel, but he went to the UK.
He lived in the UK, but he was an agent of Mossad, and
like a secret agent, like a hidden agent.
Yes, it didn't come out till after he died that he had been an agent.
And this relates to Epstein somehow.
Yes. So Robert Maxwell's daughter, Ghislaine Maxwell, was obsessed with Jeffrey Epstein. She wanted to marry him, and she was his madam, and so she brought him a whole lot of young women and things for him to abuse. She was one of the people who did that. There were many, but she was one of them. She was probably the closest to Epstein. One of the things that's most
So
interesting.
did she live in Florida with him, or like in a
She's been all over the place. She's one of these sovereign individuals who's so wealthy that she can just be wherever she wants, whenever she wants.
Why is it that she attached herself to Epstein then? I mean, what's the
Oh,
draw?
she was head over heels in love with him.
He's just not that handsome, though. I mean,
he was exceptionally intelligent and well informed.
Oh, okay.
As in, we're probably talking IQ in the 170s or something. Really, really phenomenally intelligent.
So almost at your level.
Oh, I'm not at that level. Mine's about 160, but not 170.
Okay, keep going.
But
so she was attracted to his wealth, power, and intelligence.
Yes, exactly. And he was probably a fairly dashing.
Stop for a second.
Figure.
Did he kill himself, or was he killed?
Oh, I think he was killed. I don't think there's any question that I don't think he would ever have killed himself.
Because on my Facebook feed, there's a lot of these little memes that said, and he didn't kill himself. They're just all like he didn't.
When you run a compromat factory and you basically have incriminating evidence on most of the powerful people in the world, and you suddenly find yourself vulnerable, they're not going to want you to spill your guts.
Okay, don't tell me anything, Nicole. I don't want to know anything about anybody, because
I don't know, because I haven't read Jeffrey Epstein's files, so I have no idea.
No, I'm just saying I don't want any dirt on anybody, so don't share any dirt with me.
Oh, don't worry, I don't have any.
No, okay.
But one thing that was really interesting was when Epstein was quite young, he was hired to teach math in a private school to a bunch of teenage girls. He was hired by Bill Barr's father, who wrote books about being a sexual predator. So Epstein was not qualified for this job. He was hired by someone who had a fetish for teenage girls and stuff, put in charge of teenage girls to teach them when he was ridiculously young, ridiculously unqualified for the job. And he worked with Bill Barr's father. So the connections are just enormous. There's so many interconnections between these people. And this is exactly what you would expect when you have a bunch of people who are all part of a mob ring, who are all backing each other up, and they're all in this compromat circle, this circular firing squad together. So Bill Barr is absolutely connected to Epstein. And so it doesn't surprise me at all that Barr would have managed to have Epstein knocked off, and the guards were apparently sleeping, and the video cameras didn't work, all of them. And it's just ridiculous. I mean, there are far too many coincidences for any of that to be true. I mean, he would definitely have been bumped off.
This sounds like it could easily make a Hollywood movie out of this.
Oh, yes. I'm sure it will. I would actually bet my life that somebody's going to make a movie out of this. How could they not? I mean,
it could star like well, who's the action hero? As he could be the murderer, the person who killed Epstein, like Keanu Reeves or somebody. But
one of the things that's interesting as well is that the Department of Justice swooped down on Epstein's private island and took all his files. So now the US government possesses the biggest trove of compromat probably on the face of the earth. Oh. So this is interesting because the administration can now blackmail all sorts of other people all over the world. Might be an interesting way of controlling certain people, you never know.
So was there something with Epstein about someone in the UK as far as like the prince or something?
Yes, Prince Andrew was a good friend of Jeffrey Epstein.
And who's Prince Andrew? Is the
third son of the Queen.
So Charles's younger brother twice over.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's Charles, Anne, Andrew, Edward are the Queen's kids. So Andrew's the third one. And he was good friends with Jeffrey Epstein. He lies about it all the time. And it's just, he was up to his neck in this. He really was. And he won't talk to law enforcement. He's just basically relying on his privilege as a member of the royal family to just be above the law. And this is wrong. And he was definitely involved in what Epstein was doing. In fact, one of the people who follows me on Twitter is one of the people that he was accused of raping when she was 17. And so that there are lots and lots of connections. I mean, I don't think for a moment the Queen will allow Prince Andrew to be extradited, to the States to face charges or anything. But yeah, he's absolutely up to his eyeballs in it. So is Bill Clinton and quite a lot of other people as well.
Bill Clinton?
Oh yes, Bill Clinton used to go to Epstein's Island a lot.
So is Bill Clinton
More than Trump did.
So Trump went there as well?
Yep. Oh, Trump and Epstein have been friends for years. They fell out over a particular girl that both of them wanted to have, a particular underage girl they were both interested in.
What is your source for this, Nicole?
Well, enormous numbers of sources. I don't even always remember them all because I read so broadly.
Okay.
There's a legal papers out about Trump being involved in raping a 13-year-old, for instance. She dropped the case because she was threatened, but the case documents are still there. They're still online. You can still read them. And there were witnesses. So this is unusual for a case like that. Most of the time, you wouldn't find there would be a witness who would be prepared to put their name on the line for a case like that.
It gives me chills just to think that, I mean, these sound like really, really evil, selfish people, like a lot of them. And they're like in the media all the time, and they're in positions of authority and control. And I mean, the Clintons are kind of in a position of respect from a lot of people. And, there's people who love Donald. They went to his rally, 7,000, 6,000 or whatever of them. I mean, I don't think they were all paid. So.
No, they weren't. But that rally, one thing I'd just like to say about that rally that I thought was absolutely delicious, as the way all these kids all over the world requested tickets. And so he thought 1 million people were coming to this rally, and he ended up with 6,200, according to the fire marshal. And he was absolutely horrified. The kids hadn't even told their parents. So on my Twitter feed yesterday, there's all these people saying, my 16-year-old just told me she had 5 tickets to the Trump rally. And apparently these kids just did this on their own. And they didn't tell the adults because they said, oh, adults talk too much. You'll spoil it. If we tell the adults, they'll spoil it. So we're just going to keep it to ourselves. There was a whole lot of K-pop fans. So teenagers from Korea were buying tickets to this, or registering for, not buying because they were free, but registering for tickets to this rally. And what the manager did, the campaign manager, was going out and saying, oh, we've sold 1 million tickets and this is wonderful. We're going to have overflow and have this and that and the other thing. And then of course, hardly anybody shows up. But these kids completely pranked the campaign. So it's not that they took tickets from other people so that other people couldn't go, because there was an unlimited number of tickets. So anyone could have had a ticket if they wanted. But what they did was they got the campaign manager to be bragging about the number of tickets. And then a bunch of people probably thought, I'm not going down there, that I'll never find anywhere to park. And I'm going to have to stand the whole time because there's 1 million people turning up in the center of Tulsa. I don't think so. So it completely wrecked the messaging. And it's also wrecked the data, because a lot of these things, they're data halls, these rallies. You're supposed to register with email, and they do all these manipulations to find out who they can target different ads to in different places. It's a huge data operation. But what these kids did is completely screwed up the data operation. It's made the entire data set worthless because it's now full of fake data. So, and that data was probably something they put a lot of money into obtaining, and now it's worthless. So these kids actually stood up for something, and more power to them. I think that was really clever.
It's interesting because Donald came to Michigan, to Battle Creek, which is about an hour southish of here. And this was in the winter, I think. I don't remember if it was December or January or something. And so I thought it would be interesting to see him in person, to see like what was the vibe and stuff. So I got a couple tickets, and I went down there, and I got there like an hour early, and it was all, the police had barricades and everything, and I had to park way far away and walk through the snow and get there. And I got there like an hour early, and the whole stadium was already is not a large stadium, maybe 3,000 or whatever. It was already filled, and everybody was outside trying to watch this jumbotron, that was outside, and there was another maybe 1,000 people outside. But then there was another 1,000 on the other side of this fence that had their, never Trump, signs and everything. And it's interesting to think that it hasn't been that long since that. I mean, it's less than 6 months, and he goes from having this probably 4,000 or 5,000 people come to see him in Michigan during the dead of winter to in Oklahoma only able to get 7,000 in the huge city. I mean, Battle Creek's not a huge city, and
various people who follow these rallies
have
pointed out that the energy is changing. So initially there was a huge buzz, and people there's Aaron Rupar and Daniel Dale. They both are the two that do the most fact checking of Trump rallies. So they watch everything he does. And they were pointing out that the whole vibe of these rallies has changed. That initially there was this huge upwelling of enthusiasm for the message. And apparently a couple of the rallies, there was this huge upwelling of anger, and these people were really quite frightened at what could come out of a rally like that. But going to this one in Tulsa, it was sort of like, yay. It's like really low key, and it's like yawn. And there are videos of people yawning, checking their phones, going to sleep and stuff like that. So it really does seem that he doesn't have new messages. It's just the same thing all the time. And they'll cheer for the laugh lines that they know that are coming. It's a bit like you go to watch a band and they play your favorite song from 20 years ago, one of their early songs that everybody loves, and everyone goes, yay, and then they may play their new material and people go, they don't really relate to that yet. Well, Trump doesn't have new material. So, I mean, he'll rant and ramble, and then he'll come out with one of his standard laugh lines, his lock her up or whatever it might be. And everyone will get in on that, but then they all go back to sleep again. And he just doesn't seem to have a way to keep it going. And he spent 10 minutes at his the last rally, the recent one, explaining how he failed to walk normally down a ramp the week before. And he did this demonstration of being able to drink water with one hand. So he theatrically picked up a glass of water and took a sip and tossed the glass to one side, because that had been in the news as well, that he had to use two hands to drink a glass of water, because that's a neurological sign. He has neurological damage of some kind. So he did this, and then he had to do that to get the water up to his mouth the previous week. And he was trying to walk down this ramp at West Point, and he couldn't do it. He said it was really slippery. He literally spent 10 minutes trying to spin a line to justify why he couldn't walk down a ramp. And that sort of thing just bores people to tears. And I don't think people like to hear about flushing the toilet 15 times or whatever it might be. Or he went into that as well. Not this rally, but that became part of his standard part of rallies. Not enough water in toilets and dishwashers and showers. I mean, if you Google it, Trump dishwashers, toilets, and showers, you will hear the most ridiculous stuff on video. Him going on for like 10, 20 minutes about how toilets don't work and you have to flush them 15 times. I mean, if you watch all this stuff, you would not believe what you eventually see. I mean, none of this gets into the mainstream media, but it's all there. And if you follow the people who are following his rallies and stuff, like Aaron Rupar, for instance, I think he writes for Vox, but he will do a whole thread, and he takes these video clips, a minute or two, and he'll put a little bit, this is what was happening, and then you see the video, and it goes through the whole thing, so you don't have to actually sit there and watch the entire performance yourself. You get very much the gist of it because it gives you the highlights. So in Trump's own words, you hear all this stuff. But you never hear that in the mainstream media. They just don't cover it. They normalize him. They don't cover the crazy shit that he does all the time.
So is the media as corrupt as the politicians we've been talking about?
Yes. And they're all corporate as well. So Trump talks about the media being against him. They're not against him. Some reporters are definitely against him. But in terms of the corporate offices of these media companies, they love him. He's great for ratings. So they staged this fake fight. It's like WWE. No, it's not real fighting. It's staged fighting that never actually tells you anything and covers up crime with scandal all the time and goes as far as it can to normalize him so that when he does an interview and things, they will edit it for clarity to make him sound like a normal person. But if you actually read a real transcript or you watch the thing live, it's just word salad. Half the time it makes no sense whatsoever. He'll go 10 minutes without finishing a sentence. He'll just go from one idea to another, and it's just absolutely all over the map. It's completely.
We do that sometimes.
I will occasionally sort of take tangents and things, but I usually come back to where I started. And if it's a tangent, it was a tangent that was meant to illuminate some aspect of the previous discussion. So yes, some people do that for good reasons, but if you listen to Trump, literally, I mean, you can when people do a transcript, it's just dot, 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 because the sentence hasn't finished, and he just goes on to the next idea, and there's dot, dot, dot again, and it's just ridiculous.
Okay, so the media, so you said Vox. Are there other medias that you actually pay attention to? I mean...
Oh, I pay attention to all kinds of media, but I don't necessarily say, I don't pick a paper, say the Washington Post, for instance, and say, I will believe everything in the Washington Post. I don't do that ever, not with any media outlet. I find individual reporters who I particularly like. So I would read anything by Greg Sargent at the Washington Post, for instance. But I will get grumpy over almost anything that Maggie Haberman writes in the New York Times because she's a family friend of Trump's and she never comes out and admits that she has a conflict of interest. So she tends to soft pedal everything all the time. She makes it sound like she's criticizing him, but she's actually pulling her punches all the time because she's a family friend. And this kind of thing is corrupt. I mean, if somebody is a family friend, they shouldn't be writing about the person anyway. And if they do, they should make it absolutely clear that they have this pre-existing relationship. And then people can judge that they're writing in that context. But to just write about someone and pretend you're being objective when you're not is wrong. So I never read her articles, for instance. The New York Times is particularly conflicted at the moment because they've had some excellent work on Trump. For instance, all the work on the Trump family taxes and things that they brought out, I think it was a year or two ago. That sort of reporting is incredible. But at the same time, they'll also give them a free pass on all sorts of things. And there have been some New York Times stories that have been just infuriating. And I've seen people canceling their subscriptions right, left, and center because they just can't stand it. It's so obviously puff pieces and covering things up. And well, yeah, there are lots of sources. I follow individuals. So I tend to follow individual people on Twitter or Facebook. But for this sort of work, I tend to follow people on Twitter. And then I don't much worry about where it is they actually work. Occasionally, if I find several people from a publication who all put out interesting things, then I might follow the publication itself. But mostly I work at the level of the individual reporters, and I follow what they say for long enough to get a sense of what their credibility might be. And if I really find them credible, then I will read a lot more of what they have to say. And if I don't, then I'll stop following them. It's a scattergun kind of approach.
So can I ask you, it's not a personal question, but do you read the Automatic Earth Daily?
No, I read it on and off, like I read a lot of things.
Okay,
I don't read anything daily.
Stop for a second, because your name came up.
Oh, okay. It does every now and then.
He says, what's the author's name?
Raul Ilargi Meyer.
Okay, so here's what he says. It's been well over 4 years since I started noticing and writing about that the New York Times, Washington Post, and others began to publish 10 or more anti-Trump stories every single day. And that got me labeled as a Trump supporter. No use saying that I'm not, and never have been. Even Nicole, bless her heart, said, yes, you are. like I am so too stupid to know what I support, or maybe I'm a closet Trumpian. It's the whole idea of if you don't comply with the narrative and parrot CNN, etc., you must be against them. And it's true that I dislike CNN very much for adopting a 24/7 anti-Trump business model. But that is not the same as supporting Trump. A news channel should provide us with news, not a political opinion. I would almost hope Joe Biden wins, not going to happen, because that would mean the end of CNN. I often think Trump and Jerry Zucker have a secret deal that requires Trump to say 100 crazy things per day and CNN to report on all of them and invent 100 more as they go along.
There's no need to invent any crazy stuff for Trump. He does more than enough crazy stuff to fill a book or multiple books.
So I think that's interesting because I think Raul's his collections of articles each day are interesting.
I'm sure they are.
I look at them every day, along with Zero Hedge, even though Zero Hedge is like, I mean, it's becoming more and more clear to me what Zero Hedge's position on articles are. I mean, really, really, really more clear.
They're pretty right wing.
They are, but they still occasionally have, I mean, financial news.
Oh yeah, that's all I follow them for. And I don't read them every day. I just read things that I would be interested in, but there's a whole lot of stuff on Zero Hedge that I wouldn't touch for anything.
Oh yeah, my gosh.
By the way, Jeff Zucker and Donald Trump are friends, and Jeff Zucker gave Trump his start on The Apprentice. So they're friends. Trump gives CNN great ratings. CNN pretends to have a fake feud with Trump. That's what it is.
So for people who are watching CNN, they're actually watching a buddy of Trump's channel, basically.
Yes.
So how different is CNN from Fox News then?
Well, it's not in the same position as Fox News. Fox News is infinitely worse. And One America Network is even worse than that. CNN has some useful stuff from time to time. I don't find them a particularly good news organization. There are things that they put out that I would agree with and things that I wouldn't, but I don't.
They were really great around the year 1990, I thought.
I wasn't really watching them back then. I was very much into BBC at that point because I was living in England. And
is there a good news channel anymore? I mean, there's like
the BBC
Sky
is a lot
News,
less than it used
there's
to be.
BBC, there's RT, there's Al Jazeera, but is there actually really one good that's not so corporatist?
I don't really think there's anything that I would say this is a good organization. I think all of them have got too big, and they all have other motivations besides telling the truth that have a lot to do with money. So again, I would just go for individuals. Like if I find a particular reporter at an institution whose work I find really credible, then I will follow them, but I won't follow the whole institution, and I won't assume that everything that institution puts out would be something I'd be interested in.
All right, I think the theme of this talk is corruption in the USA in particular. And we've talked about political corruption. We've talked some about media corruption. What other corruption did we miss?
Well, I mean, the whole
bank corruption.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the entire financial system is running on fumes of corruption at the moment. If you got rid of the corruption, the entire system would collapse, because that's all that there is at the moment. We're so close to hitting that brick wall, that limits to growth brick wall. You can only comprehensively lie to yourself as a nation for so long. The Soviet Union did that. They just.
Are you speaking to me as the USA?
Well, not even just the USA, but any country that's going down a route in becoming more and more corrupt, it can only get so corrupt before it's going to collapse. So in the late 80s and early 90s, I mean, it's the Soviet Union, well, they had these five-year plans all the way through. And the idea was there'd be a plan, it'd be you, Mr. Factory Owner, you have to make this many widgets in a year. And usually that would be impossible for whatever reason. But the factory managers realized that, nobody could actually really check how many widgets they had made. So they would simply say, oh yes, I definitely made my target for widgets. In fact, I exceeded it. And they would then say, I made this many widgets, and they would get an even bigger bonus, and no one would ever check. So they would just get their bonus and they'd be happy. The next 5-year plan would have an even bigger target that was even more impossible to meet. And the whole country went into a situation where it was comprehensively lying to itself. So nobody had the faintest idea what was actually going on. And this is what happens at the end, just before empires collapse. You get so much untruth, and nobody has any idea what's actually happening, that you just can't go on in that state of confusion before eventually it catches up with you.
Did you
You
read a
can't go
book
on like that
called
forever.
Future Shock? Because someone mentioned that in this regard. That
I did not write that. I haven't read it either.
No. I asked, did you read it? Because I think that was part of the idea, that things just get so incomprehensible that people kind of throw up their hands and say, I don't know.
They do. I mean, this happens anyway. So what happens during an empire is you get more and more complexities. This is Tainter's work. So you get more complexity. Complexity causes problems that you solve with more complexity. Eventually you get to the point where you're into declining marginal returns to complexity. But one of the things that Tainter didn't talk about that I think is actually quite important is when you're at that peak of complexity, probably somewhere between 1/2 and 3/4 of the people in the country don't have the faintest idea how anything works because it's too complicated for them. I mean, they're out there working because they have to. They're working paycheck to paycheck.
This reminds me,
rat race.
This reminds me of like at the start of a country like the USA. So first we had the Articles of Confederation was kind of our first constitution, and then we tossed that out, and then we had the US Constitution with our 10 amendments, Bill of Rights. And then from that, we had lots and lots of laws created year after year after year, and each state had their own constitution with laws, and then you have case law, and then you get to now, and there's just this mass of stuff. I mean, no one can know all of it. I mean, at the time the Constitution was signed, people could know everything that there was to know. Because they had their religion.
You could really understand the system.
Right.
And now you can't. Even if you're the smartest person on the face of the earth with nothing else to do but put all your time into trying to understand the system, you will not understand all of it. You can't. It's bigger than any one person is capable of understanding.
Well, and these bills are horrible too. Like in the US, we have something that comes up every few years. Yeah, the Farm Bill, which is thousands of pages.
And they don't even read them. They vote on them without even reading the thing. So the system is so complex now that and a lot of people, it's not just whether they have the brains to understand the complexity, it's whether they have the time. If you're working paycheck to paycheck and you get like 5 minutes to yourself in any given day, you have no chance of being able to do the amount of reading and thinking that it would take to be able to truly understand where the system is going. And I honestly think the reason that there's such a disconnect between the reality of Trump and a lot of people's perceptions is because people only have time to sort of skim headlines and stuff in the mainstream media. They don't have time to dig underneath those headlines. They probably don't even have time to read the article, let alone actually go and look for people who are particularly credible on this topic and then read books on it as well.
So those
people
2 months
do not have the time.
Those 2 months of lockdown were kind of a wake-up call for a lot of people, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, suddenly people might have had a bit more time to do that if that's what they chose to use the time to do. I don't know whether they would have done or not.
Now, a lot of people did a lot of binge watching, I'm afraid.
Yeah, people probably spend a lot of time watching Tiger King and stuff like that. I did not watch Tiger King. I've heard about it. I have not watched it, and I have zero intention of ever watching it.
Yeah, I have a long story about Tiger King, but let's not talk about that. A personal story about it, but we're not going to.
It sort of reminds me of Jerry Springer. I don't know if that's even still on, but it was when I lived in Canada. And I'd heard Jerry Springer described as people getting their jollies watching cripples play football, only these people were emotional cripples. It's like, watch people come out
Does
and
he
wash
just
their
yell
dirty
at
laundry.
people or something? I can't remember. If they were bad people, he'd like yell
Encourage
at them.
people to tell their stories, all their horrible stories in public, it just embarrassed these people. They humiliated themselves in public for the entertainment of other people who thought they were better than them.
But they got
So it was
paid
a
like
horrible
$50
thing.
or $100 to be on the show or something.
Yeah, it was a horrible spectacle, and you're getting that sort of thing again, and it really is sad. I mean, but there's so many people who just they don't understand what's going on. Some people have just completely given up on the idea of truth as an objective reality at all. Other people have tried to find some authoritative source they can believe, and a lot of the Trump people have gravitated to this Q thing, QAnon conspiracy, which is just ridiculous. I mean, it makes absolutely no sense, and it keeps being wrong, but people keep believing it anyway. It's like these cult leaders who keep saying the world will end next Saturday, and when it doesn't, they just come up with another date, and all the believers still believe, even although date after date after date passes and nothing happens. So the whole QAnon thing is very much like that. So the QAnon people are saying that Trump is head of some pedophile hunting group, and they're about to arrest tens of thousands of Democrats and things because they're all pedophiles, and that's just ridiculous.
But you're saying Trump is part of that group.
Oh, yes. Well, Trump loves QAnon. I'm not saying he initiated it. I don't think he's intelligent enough for that. But QAnon supports Trump and just keeps spinning these lines to keep people involved.
Ivanka? Could she be doing QAnon? Could she be QAnon?
I have absolutely no idea. I imagine she would think that's beneath her, that she wouldn't really want to put that kind of effort into anything, but I don't think these people know how to work hard, shall we say. They just sort of sit back and take the spoils as they're presented to them.
Well,
it's amazing how much information is out there if you've got a lot of time. And basically my entire life at the moment is researching all of this every minute of every day.
Well, what are you doing with all this research, Nicole? Are you going to run for the premiere of New Zealand or the...
I would be a terrible politician. I just would not be able to do that.
But if Jacinda called you up and said, hey, Nicole, I saw you talking with Aaron the other day, and hey, can you come in and be like an advisor? I've got nothing.
I would actually do that if they would ever ask me, which they never will because they have no idea who I am. But yes, an advisory position is something I would be quite happy to do. I would make a terrible politician. I just could not do that.
Well, wasn't there like that guy in Weimar, Germany, who was like hired? I mean, he was really smart, and they brought him in, and he was the guy that said, you know, we're going to have to do a few things about the mark here. We're going to have to switch from this mark to this mark, and we're going to have to base it on this and this and this. And then he was like, whoop, we're doing it today. Ta-da! And then a few days later, he was like, whoop, we got to do something else. And then he like vanished after. I mean, he left the political life. So he came in, he fixed this problem, and then he left.
Well, it's not a story that I know, I'm afraid. I'd have to look that one up.
Okay, well, I
might ask Kai. Kai might know.
I might have simplified it a little bit, but is Kai German?
Yes, he was born in Germany. He moved to New Zealand in 2008 because he was basically looking at what was going on in Europe at that time and thinking, this is not a good place to raise my kids. So he moved here in 2008, and I came in 2014.
Yeah, so QAnon's got lots of interesting stuff today. Well, no, this is old stuff. I don't know. On Facebook, there's so many QAnon groups that it's hard to tell.
I never look up any of it, but occasionally some of it floats through one of my timelines.
Well,
and so I see things that way.
The one that I think is the one that I am paying slightly more attention to is just the Epoch Times, which is, again, is that the
Falun Gong one, yes.
Which I think of as the selfish Chinese, like I want my money Chinese. So yeah, today Epoch Times is talking about just, it's such a weird collection of stuff. Top Trump administration official has bombshell claim on coronavirus second wave, which probably says it's not going to happen. You know, Trump comments on his niece's book. What's that about? His niece's book.
Well, his niece is writing a book called How My Family Produced the Most Dangerous Man in the World. That's the subtitle anyway. I can't remember I think it's just called Trump, How My Family Produced the Most Dangerous Man in the World.
Oh, can I read you the headline? So it says, this is dated.
Mary Trump, PhD.
This is dated today, Epoch Times. The author supposedly is Zachary Stieber, and the headline is Trump. Niece not allowed to write book due to NDA, non-disclosure agreement. Mary Trump, the president's niece, wrote a book titled Too Much and Never Enough, How My Family Created the World's Most Dangerous Man, slated to be published on July 28th. She isn't allowed to write a book because she signed an NDA, President Donald Trump said in an interview with Axios. She's not allowed She's not allowed to write a book, Trump said. You know, when we settled with her and her brother, who I do have a good relationship with, she got a brother, Fred, who I do have a good relationship with. But when we settled, she has a total signed NDA.
Word salad. Yes, I'm sure she does have an NDA. That won't stop her publishing her book. The US courts do not like prior restraint. So they are not likely to prevent the publication of a book unless it's full of classified information or something. They're not likely to prevent publication, but an NDA does mean that Trump can sue Mary Trump and claim all the proceeds from the book. So he can stop her making any money, but he can't stop her putting out the book. She's a PhD psychologist, so she probably has quite a lot to say about her uncle, I would think.
My. So this is Trump's father's
Trump's older brother's. It's his older brother's daughter. So there were 5 kids, 5 Trump kids: Fred, Marianne, Elizabeth, Donald, and Robert. Donald is the 4th one. So Fred, the eldest one, was an alcoholic. He eventually died at the age of 43.
We're talking about Trump's siblings or his father's siblings?
Trump's siblings. So okay. It's confusing because there are 3 Freds. Trump's father is Fred, his brother is Fred, and his brother's son is Fred. So this is where it gets confusing. So the youngest Fred has cerebral palsy. When the oldest Fred died, Donald managed to cut his brother's kids out of the will. Despite the fact that Fred, the youngest Fred, had cerebral palsy and had medical bills, they just cut them out of the will, cut off the medical insurance and everything from that family. So I'm not surprised that family doesn't like him very much. I think it's probably fairly unlikely that the youngest Fred and Donald actually get along with each other, because Donald is the one who cut off the youngest Fred's health insurance. And the middle Fred is dead, so he has nothing to say. And the oldest Fred is dead as well. So the grandfather and the father Freds are dead, and there's just the son. But yeah, it's dirty laundry within that family, and they're all in it. I mean, when the New York Times put out their piece a couple of years ago on the Trump family taxes, Trump's sister had to resign as a judge because that was the only way to avoid being investigated for tax fraud. So she was never investigated for it as well. But the whole family has been up to their eyeballs in tax fraud for decades. The information's all out there, but people don't really pay attention very much.
Are there any actual loving, compassionate billionaires out there in the world?
I don't know any billionaires, so I wouldn't really know.
I mean,
but I doubt it.
If I pulled up the list of the Forbes top billionaires, I mean, would you be like, oh, he's a good guy, she's a good guy?
The one person who I find quite interesting is a guy called Nick Hanauer, who is, I believe he is very wealthy. I don't know if he's a billionaire, but he was one of the early investors in Amazon. And he's done a bunch of TED Talks and things like that. And he's basically saying, well, he's as close as you can get to being a rich socialist. so he will come out and he will say, look, my fellow rich people, they're going to come for us with pitchforks if we don't do something about this inequality. So he's actually putting himself out there all the time, making the argument that you have to look after everybody, that you can't just have some people have everything and other people have nothing. So yeah, I would say he's probably a reasonable person. I don't know him personally, but from what I've seen him say in public, I agree with him.
Okay. All right. Why don't we wrap up? Is there,
Okay.
and before we do, for everybody who has watched this kind of delving into the corruption in the USA in June of 2020, put a like if you've learned anything or you found this interesting or entertaining in any way, I guess. I mean, I found this educational, as always. Don't forget, you can also do the subscribe and put in your email address so you get notifications, and you can put in a comment and questions and stuff. Those are always fun to read, and I try to respond to those. Nicole, if people want to follow what you are doing, is there a way for them to do that? How would they do that?
Well, probably the best way to follow the stuff that I put up most frequently is to send me a friend request on Facebook or follow me on Twitter or something. So most of the stuff I'm doing now ends up on social media. I have my own website, which is called Applied Systems Thinking, and the URL is foss.blog. So there's all my work is there, but I haven't put more work up there recently. So that's my archive of work is at that website. I'm going to be writing more articles. I don't know exactly when, because things have been changing so quickly. If I'm going to write an article, I have to ignore the world for a month and do a deep dive into one particular thing and then write an article on it. But then I've missed a lot. When everything's changing this quickly, I don't like to do that. I don't like to take my eye off the ball for too long because I could miss something critical. So when things calm down a little bit and the rate of change is a little bit slower, then I will start writing articles again. And I do want to write a book as well. So I want to have a chance to draw all this together. I don't know when that will be. It will happen at some point, but I don't know exactly when.
Maybe you could do like a history for someone, 20 years from now who's like, what in the world went on in 2020? And then they could like read your book and you're like, you could say, well, this is what it said in the headline and this is what actually happened today. And this is what it said and this is what actually happened today. And this is how this connected to the previous thing. And I mean, the challenge is that it's, there's no start to the story. So there's no way to explain that this is where we started at. And
yeah, it's going to be complicated, but I'm determined I will do this eventually. It's just a question of trying to find the time to be able to really genuinely focus, because I have to get into the zone. And so I have to have hours and hours and hours of free time to sort of work my way into the zone and then get something done. And if I have to keep being pulled out of the zone to do stuff, then that doesn't work. So this is one of the reasons I haven't written so much recently, that there's just been too much going on and things, but I will get there again.
All right.
Kids are growing up
now. Any final thoughts or final reflections before we say adieu?
Well, I think I'm looking forward to having a chat with Daryl and you next week. I think people should really tune into that because Daryl is awesome. He's so interesting and so intelligent and so many perspectives that people wouldn't pick up on. And he's not American, so he's Australian, so a different part of the world type perspective as well.
And what are we likely to learn from Daryl?
Well, he was involved in all the greening of Cuba, all the work to the special period for Cuba, and he's involved in community networking strategies and things as well.
He's our age, or is he like in his 60s or 70s?
I think he's almost exactly the same age as me, like within a week or something, or
so
a month.
He was young during the greening of Cuba, because that was 91. So he
looks younger than he is too.
He would have been like 25, 30 during that era.
Probably. Okay. So he would be 54 at the moment, like me.
Okay. All right. And so the greening of Cuba, the implication of that, of course, the importance of that, of course, is that's when Cuba lost about 50% of its imports of oil and fertilizers and things like that, because the Soviet Union collapsed, and that was their primary trading partner, and so they had to basically grow everything everywhere.
Yes.
Food. They had to grow food everywhere, like
Mhm.
on the roofs and in flower gardens and on the sidewalks and everywhere, like in parks,
Mhm.
vacant lots, everywhere.
Mhm.
And then what else? He's been up to stuff since then.
He does a lot of work with in community. So he does things under the radar. He doesn't have a high profile job. He basically does whatever he feels he can do to earn a bit of money that lets him do his real work that he doesn't get paid for on the side.
Okay,
So
that sounds good.
he wrote an amazing report some years ago on Aboriginal people integrating into Australian society. Unfortunately, there was a major fire and his house burned down and he lost all his work.
Oh no.
His house burned down with him in it, in the King Lake fire. So he's had some pretty traumatic experiences.
Wow. Yeah.
Not just him in it, but his family as well.
Oh.
And they all survived, but half his community didn't.
Oh no.
Mm.
Did his book survive or no?
No. Nope. All his work was gone.
Oh no.
Everything was gone.
That's why I like putting stuff on. I like as I write stuff, I like it be online somewhere. I mean, not all my stuff is, but I like doing
There's
it.
another report that he did after the King Lake fire, the one where half his community died. He did a collaboration with a woman who I don't know, but it was about how do you recover from catastrophe. This would be a good thing to talk to him about as well, because he was talking about how initially it was all the local people coming out and doing everything. And then later on, the official response came in, but the official response just kind of screwed things up, tried to take things over without really having the local knowledge, and just made a mess of things. So the report that he wrote was about how to respond to catastrophe at different levels and what works and what doesn't. So that would be something really worth discussing with him too.
Yeah, this sounds good. And then I invited David Korovich also next week sometime, and so we'll see if we can put those 3 times together.
Oh, sure.
That's a
challenge. David is awesome as well. He's so smart.
All right. Well, thank you so much again, Nicole, for all of your time, and for all viewers. Nicole and I have had a number of chats. I don't know what number we're on, 7, 8, somewhere. So feel free to go back and look at those other things.
April.
What's that?
Started in early April, I think.
Yes.
So we've done a lot of them now. I think we might be up to like 30 hours worth.
It feels like it, which is good. Because I think it gives people a sense of sanity to hear a couple people conversing about.
Oh yeah, I really enjoy this sort of thing as well. Yeah, I'm sorry I wasn't feeling very well last week, but
that's the way it goes. All right, thank you so much, Nicole, and
you're welcome.
We'll see you later.
Okay, bye.